In the early years of the 20th century, photography and cinema continued to develop, with many cross-influences, both technically and artistically. The Kaiser Panorama, a German multi-stereo viewer for 3D scenic views, toured Europe for many years. By 1906, films had started to leave live theatres and travelling fairgrounds, and the first permanent cinemas were built all over the world. A stay-at-home alternative was the Kinora viewer. Developed by the Lumieres in France, it became a craze in England. Picture reels could be rented, or your own moving portrait taken, and a camera was available. The Lumieres had also invented a revolutionary colour photography system. Autochrome plates were viewed on a lightbox, and became a popular medium for middle-class amateurs to photograph their families. In America, less fortunate child labourers were the subjects of Louis Hine, an investigative photographer for the National Child Labour Committee. Technical development in cinema continued with Kinemacolor. The first natural colour process to achieve commercial distribution, it suffered financial collapse. Short singing films, the sound on a separate disc, had some success in Europe at this time. The magic lantern didn't die out when movie films appeared, but became the electric slide projector. A sophisticated version projected these 3 colour slides, photographed in Russia in the years immediately before the revolution. At this time, the first feature films appeared, and film actors became stars. The most famous being Charles Chaplin, whose own life was a rags to riches story. Film was also used to document important events. Newsreels focused on the drama of the First World War battlefields. The American photographer and filmmaker Paul Strand helped establish photography as a 20th century art form. His 1915 Wall Street experimented with formal abstractions. Strand's 1921 Manhattan, a film showing the day-to-day life of New York City, echoes his famous Wall Street photographs. Eager to explore the intersection between photography and filmmaking, artists often crossed boundaries in ways that threw critics off balance and left audiences puzzled. Man Ray's rayograms were made without a camera by placing objects directly onto photographic paper. Ray continued his surrealist experiments with film, as did many other artists. This sequence is from Legier's Ballet Mécanique. In Hollywood in 1921, the Sheikh made Rudolph Valentino a star. His death 5 years later created mass hysteria. The film industry was creating masterpieces around the world, featuring German expressionism and the extraordinary power of Russian montage editing. Home movies had always been expensive, but in the early 20s, narrow format systems brought domestic and creative opportunities to many amateurs. Kodak's 16mm film also found some professional applications. The German-made Leica camera of 1925 was the pinnacle of photographic technology, heralding the golden age of photojournalism. Its main advantage was sequential shooting, using 35mm roll film adapted from the cinema. In 1924, very soon after the first public radio broadcasts, Baird in England and Jenkins in America demonstrated primitive and mostly mechanical television systems. Soon, Zworykin and Farnsworth in America had shown alternative all-electronic arrangements. The movie industry didn't stand still. 1927 saw the release of The Jazz Singer, the first feature with dialogue and songs.
You know, with this joke, I'm going to sing it jazzy. Now get this. blue sky, smiling at me, nothing but little blue sky do I see.
In Europe, photographic art and photojournalism continued to develop. Hungarian André Kertész undertook an 11-year project photographing Parisian street life. In 1928, two projects emphasised the form of natural and man-made objects. The World is Beautiful by Albert Rengapatch and Karl Blossfeld's Art Forms in Nature. And the Rolleiflex twin-lens reflex camera for medium format work appeared. That same year, the world's first television play, The Queen's Messenger, was broadcast in New York, though only 4 receivers were tuned in. 2 years later, the BBC's short play, The Man with the Flower in His Mouth, the philosophical conversation between two men in a cafe, had far more viewers.
Death has passed my way and put this flower in my mouth.
In the 1930s, Hollywood movies, some produced in foreign language versions, were popular throughout much of the world. The film industry created Technicolor, cumbersome to produce but magical in its colour effects. 3 black and white negatives were made in the same camera, using filters. The old chronophotography system for recording movement over time became strobe photography, the main proponent being Harold Edgerton at MIT. American photography was being influenced by Group F64, dedicated to straight photographic thought and production. In 1932, Henri Cartier-Bresson bought a Leica and began a 60-year career photographing people. The following year, Georges Brassai published the acclaimed Paris de Nuit. In 1934, the Japanese Fuji Photo Company was formed, and 2 years later, the first Canon camera appeared. Roll film colour photography was made accessible to the general public with the arrival of Kodachrome in America, also available in home movies, and Agfacolor in Germany. Also in Germany and in Britain, in 1936 the world's first regular high-definition television systems were launched. Cinema sound feature production had expanded worldwide, with classics as varied as the escapist musicals from Hollywood, Leni Riefenstahl's masterful and controversial Triumph of the Will from Germany, Cocteau's The Blood of a Poet from France, and from Russia, Eisenstein's Alexander Nevsky. In 1939, Hollywood's big screen adaptation of Gone with the Wind premiered, becoming one of the most profitable films of all time. And American television officially arrived at the New York World's Fair. A team of photographers, including Margaret Bourke-White, covered World War II for Life magazine. And Hollywood film director turned soldier George Stevens took his colour movie camera as he travelled throughout war-torn Europe, filming the liberation of Paris on 16mm Kodachrome. During World War II, experimental colour television was developed in Britain and America, but would not be widely adopted for more than 20 years. War's end saw the formation of the photographer-owned Magnum Picture Agency, which would thrive until the present day. In 1948, Hasselblad in Sweden offered its first medium-format SLR for commercial sale, and Edwin Land's Polaroid system for instant black and white prints was launched. For most of the world, television had stopped during the war, but by the early 50s was expanding rapidly in many countries.
I was completely overwhelmed by the technical complexities and problems that broadcasting industry has been solving.
The movie industry fought back with new attractions. Stereoscopic movies at the Festival of Britain heralded a short-lived wave of 3D features from Hollywood. Cinerama provided thrills, but more lasting was the effect of CinemaScope. Widescreen images and stereophonic sound had come to stay. In 1955, Edward Steichen curated the Family of Man exhibit at New York's Museum of Modern Art, 503 photographs from 68 countries. The exhibition travelled the world, being seen by more than 9 million people. Robert Frank's 1958 book, The Americans, was influential for its fresh and nuanced outsider's view of American society, Frank later expanded into film and video. William Klein set out to reinvent the photographic document. His high-contrast prints, sometimes blurred or out of focus, made use of grainy film and wide angles, and shocked the established order of the photographic world. In 1958, Klein started making films, collaborating with directors including Jean-Luc Godard. In 1959, Godard's low-budget Breathless, typical of the French New Wave use of the handheld camera and improvised direction, was made in just 4 weeks. The jump cut's assault on seamless editing opened new possibilities for filmmakers. And in America in 1960, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho terrified audiences and became one of the most memorable psychological thrillers.